And today, my guest is a very special person. He just joined me spontaneously, and I really appreciate his kind efforts to join me in here. He's coming from Colorado, which is a very big thing for my podcast so far because he is my first English content. He is the owner and the host of the Fourth Down Fiasco podcast, which is focused on ELF players and their stories. Please check it out. Big shout out to Fourth Down Fiasco. You can find it on Spotify or YouTube. Please welcome my friend Jordan Pryor. Welcome in.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. That was a nice little introduction.
I appreciate it. I actually consume a lot of podcasts, and I'm very interested in ELF content and so on. And I don't even remember, probably one of the nights I was, going around YouTube, and then I saw like a big episode. I think it was the exclusive interview with Riley Hennessy or something. So I started watching it, and I saw this is great content because I believe right now the industry for podcasts in Europe is actually on the rise, and there is a big podcast opportunity there. And you are the guys utilizing that, and what you're doing is more professional than what I do. So I thought there is definitely something that I can learn from you. Without talking so much, I always enter with this specific question. Please, let's start this discussion with my friend Jordan. I ask you this question: Who is Jordan Pryor?
Oh man. So I guess that if I were to give myself my elevator pitch about myself, I am originally from Texas. So grew up loving football. Texas high school football is huge down in Texas. And I was never good enough to play for my specific high school. My graduating class had probably 4 or 5 guys who went to the NFL. So it wasn't that I wasn't an athlete. I just wasn't the same tier of athlete as everybody else. So I ended up playing rugby. But I've always, always, always loved football with all of my heart. And I used to do a lot of sports journalism in high school and college. Actually, in college with NTTV, won a daytime Emmy for best broadcast, best college broadcast, which was really cool. So shout out to the University of North Texas for that one. I actually didn't even know that we won that Emmy until like 2 years later. Somebody was like, that you can add that to your resume, right? And I was like, oh, I didn't know that was our show. But yeah, I've always just been around football and I've always been around sports journalism. I started doing marketing fresh out of college because, paid the bills a lot better than being a journalist, and needed the money. I have a wife who, she's a full-time student. So it was like, you got to pay for 2 people, and making $30,000 in the US for journalism just wasn't going to cut it. So did the marketing thing, kind of stepped away from journalism for a little while. And then we moved up here because she started a grad program not too far from where we're at now. And from there, one of my coworkers reached out to me. What was it? I want to say October of this past year, and was like, "Hey, me and a friend are thinking about starting a football podcast. I know you love football. I know that you've done this kind of stuff before. Are you interested?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, I'm interested. This sounds like a great time." And for me, it wasn't even a thing of like, let's make money off it. Let's be huge. And we're not huge by any stretch, but we are growing. And for me, it was just more of like, sounds like a good time just to get to talk ball with the guys. And we've just been so blessed with the opportunity now that, with the ELF season, of how much support and love we've received, not just from the players, but from the ELF community as a whole. Because we were trying to figure out what content we were going to do during the off season. And we started like a fan base segment where we started talking to all the NFL fan bases and getting their takes on the past season. And it really wasn't going anywhere. And Danny, one of my co-hosts, saw a clip of, some of the big hits that you see in the ELF. He saw a clip of like a bunch of big hits on TikTok, and it was like countdown to the ELF season. So he came to me and Tanner and was like, "Hey, why don't we do this? Maybe there's some opportunity here." And we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, and it's been an absolute joy since then. So yeah, I'm not going to ramble on too much longer about myself, but yeah, that's the 2-minute version of who is Jordan Pryor.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it, my man. I mean,
Yeah.
one thing that really surprised me is that you actually, I don't know if it's like if you got lucky or you got successful to reach very big names in the league right now, which I
Mhm.
believe will generate quite a little leads. And I think many of the people actually wonder about their story because I just checked it again. Now you had episodes with Riley Hennessy, Zach Edwards, and Jordan Bua, and definitely big names, like leading the ELF in numbers and everything. Like those are the popular names. And I actually want to focus about your story and how did you build that podcast and what led you to this day basically.
Yeah.
So my I have quite a lot of questions, but let's focus on the first. So how and why did you actually you answered the why, but like how did you start this podcast? And please mention about the name. Like why did you decide Fourth Down Fiasco?
Well, so the name was actually Danny's the one who came up with it. He was the one who really put in the beginning legwork to really set this thing off. I'm not super sure where he got Fourth Down Fiasco from. If I remember correctly, it had something to do with a really bad ending to a game on a fourth down situation, and it was a fiasco, and so it just kind of manifested from there. Um, but yeah, when he came to me and we were talking about like the logistics of actually putting the podcast together, we were like, okay, what all do we need? Recording equipment, getting microphones, getting headsets, figuring out what platforms to record on, et cetera, et cetera. That was kind of our big struggle at first. Was just if people check out our first probably 3 to 4 episodes on Spotify, dude, they were bad. They were really bad because we had all kinds of audio issues, technical issues. We didn't know how to pace the show. We didn't have an identity, which, that happens. And that's going to happen with any brand new podcast, trying to figure out who you are and who your audience is. But yeah, there was just a lot of prep work that we all kind of wish we would have done more before the season had started instead of just saying, oh, we're going to start releasing podcast episodes now. But we worked through the kinks, and I'm really excited for this upcoming NFL season just because I think that we'll be able to deliver better content on that end. But then something else that you mentioned, and I don't know if you had already asked this question or if it was something that you're going to ask later on, but as far as the reaching out to people and getting some of the bigger names, yeah, like Jordan Bois onto the show and Riley Hennessy, and we even got the owner of the Madrid Bravos, Jaime Martin Lostau, out there with us. A big thing that I learned in journalism, in high school and in college, is just ask. You would be surprised how many people don't get asked to be in interviews. Obviously, when we're talking about the NFL, yes, your Josh Allens and Pat Mahomes and Joe Burrows of the world are constantly being asked to be on podcasts and stuff like that. The Bosa brothers, like you go down the list, the biggest names in the NFL are being asked to do stuff. But with something like the ELF, where there is a lot less content that's being generated, I mean, a lot of these guys that we have interviews with, they're like, this is the first time I've been on a football podcast. And so, that was kind of the cool thing. The cool realization was whenever we started reaching out to people was how willing they were to be on the show because they never had that opportunity before. And so it's always just about asking. They kind of put me in charge. Tanner and Danny have kind of put me in charge of. I'm normally the one who books the interview with the players because I speak kind of the lingo, and I was kind of a meathead at one point in life, so I fit in with that crowd pretty well, and so. But yeah, it's really just all about asking. The worst they can do is say, "Hey, man, I'm busy. Hey, I can't." But we've had some guys who don't respond at all. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, Glenn Tunga, but there are some guys that I still want to have on the show that I'm just waiting on responses on. But I'm constantly sending out messages to people because then you get somebody like Riley Hennessy or you get somebody like Zach Edwards who are like, sure, screw it, I'll join. And then people are like, wow, like in your case, how did you get them on? It's like we just asked. It was as simple as that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, when I thought about starting also my podcast, and I also saw the same opportunity there. Like you mentioned about some podcasts happening around the ELF, and one of which is in German actually. But
Mhm.
there I saw there's a fundamental problem because ELF is on a rise among Americans and Canadians and all the other people trying to make it to the ELF, right? So
Mhm.
like that group of people actually is very high in population, but they don't speak German. So actually,
Yeah.
the market opportunity there is a podcast addressing the English-speaking population, especially Americans. So in that sense, what you do right now is actually something big. I believe you're gonna go something like you will establish something great. But when I think about the other podcasts, probably you know about them. Last year, ELF actually put them on an official spot, if I'm not mistaken. So the guy was
Mhm.
called Malfa Male or something like that.
Yeah, Nick. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Nick Fieri. Yeah, Nick Fieri, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. But yeah,
Yeah,
Nick.
I know him by his username, which was Alpha Male. I
Mhm.
watched like 3 or 4 episodes of his podcast. Actually, I don't remember if it's his own podcast or the podcast was owned by the ELF, but he was the guy. He was the sound of the ELF. So I'm very sad that I think this year didn't put through like new episodes. I don't know what happened with them, but last year I was following them through. But
Mhm.
this year, I found out about you guys. But yeah, talking about the ELF, one thing you do different than me is that you guys podcasts are owned by, or like you're 3 people doing the podcast. And how
Mhm.
did that evolve? Like how did you decide doing it 3 people at the same time? Or like can you talk a bit about that? Like what are the
Mhm.
pros and cons, and what are the challenges of doing that business by 3 people?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's definitely pros and cons to it. The whole reason why was originally it was Danny and Tanner, which they were college roommates, really good friends. I'm kind of the third wheel in all of this, and they wanted to start a podcast, but Tanner's a social worker, so he only has so much time, and he was kind of telling Danny that he didn't know if he was going to commit to it. And so almost as like a backup plan, Danny came to me and was like, "Hey, would also like to have you on." So then that way, as time goes along, if Tanner has to miss, I could jump on. And we all three ended up just kind of really finding out that we really liked it. And so we just, Tanner and I both make time out of our busy schedules to be on it. And so it's really nice, especially during this time of year. Danny and I both travel a lot for work. I especially travel a lot for work. And so there are some times where I can't be on air with them just because I'm out somewhere on a job site doing something, and so then it's them too. And so there's always a backup. There's always someone who can record. We haven't missed a week since we've started this, which is pretty impressive given that we don't make money off of it. And shows the kind of commitment we have for it. One of the big struggles, and really the only struggle I think that there Um, is the pacing with 3 people can get difficult at times. I think that we've done a really good job now of who talks when. We've gotten really good at knowing the flow of the conversation and stuff. But especially early on, there was a lot of all 3 of us cutting each other off and things like that. And it also does make the interviews a little bit difficult too whenever all 3 of us are on, because like one of the things that I really enjoyed about the Riley Hennessy interview was that it was just him and I. And so it was super easy because as I wanted to say, okay, he kind of partially answered this question, so I'm not going to ask it, or I'm going to reword it. Where, I can just say that in my brain, not have to interrupt anything and just continue. Whereas whenever it's the 3 of us and we're interviewing one person, we have a Google Doc that we use that, we can make changes to in real time, but all 3 of us are constantly like having to write notes of like, hey, he answered this question. Okay, Danny, you need to ask him this question, not this question. So it's just a lot more stressful that way. But yeah, I think though, the more that we do it, and it has gotten smoother as we've progressed, I think that them not having a journalism background, they're starting to figure it out too, of like, oh, hey, and so like I have to write less notes. They're on top of it now. And so yeah, it's just the flow of the shows is really the main con. But once you master it, and I think that we're starting to get to a point where we've really polished it. Then it leads to great content, because then you're constantly getting a new perspective.
Yeah, I understand, and in that sense, I actually can comment on the virtual thing. I believe there's another energy about understanding when to start talking and when to stop, because when
Mhm.
we like usually we humans are evolved to do this, and we learned our social skills, face to face. But I think we are now better after the pandemic, doing things virtually. And actually, I think one of the hardest things that you do with your podcast is that you're geographically very far away from the people that you interview with. So
Mhm.
that might be a challenge that just pops into my mind. But turning back to the virtual pacing thing, like I actually was way more nervous about my first and second and third episodes, because like when to start, when to talk, how not to interrupt people and so on. But actually, the more you do it, the better you get. That's what I
Right.
believe. But yeah, about the geographical distance of what you're doing, is that did it ever happen that because I'm thinking about it, an ELF player is usually very busy. Very busy means like they're having like 2 or 3 sessions per day about training. It's not only training, like one session about is recovery, and the second session, like doing things with bands. The third thing is like they have to watch film, and they're assigned some tasks by their coaches, like you gotta do this, like all mind work. So
Right.
what I encountered once or twice is that like most of the people are very open, because you already put it that way, like almost none of them never get approached by a podcaster, hey, would you like to speak in my podcast? In that sense, they're
Mhm.
like, yeah, sure, man, I really like to talk. But one of the challenges that I encountered was that some people actually, on theory, they like to talk, but they also go through some struggles. Like
Mhm.
it might be very tight schedule, or they might be injured, or they might be under like quite a lot of pressure, or they might not be just feeling like talking at this week, because they might have a very stressful game ahead of them. Especially playoffs are coming, and you already said in the beginning of this episode, like wish we started the podcast before the ELF season, so this could have been easier, right? So,
Right.
like, did you ever encounter this sort of challenges? Because I text a couple of guys, but they put me on their agenda for like for the future. They told me that right now it's not a good time.
Mhm.
Like their schedule is quite busy, so they don't feel like talking about some things. It might be that they're kind of afraid of questions, like the potential questions that I might ask them, because like, hey, what happened with that injury, or what happened, like, are you going to be able to play next week, whatsoever? Did you ever had these sort of experiences with anyone, or can you relate?
Yeah, we've had a couple of guys who have dropped out of interviews, and something that we do that I think brings some guys a lot of comfort, because you're right, there are certain topics, like basically politics within the ELF, that guys aren't allowed to speak on. And I do think that there is a fear of saying the wrong thing with those topics. And so we always, normally, if I were to do an interview face to face, I wouldn't give somebody the questions beforehand. But since it's over Zoom, I always tell people, I'm like, hey, I'll send you the questions. Give me a good email. Let me know if there's anything that you don't feel comfortable answering, or that you're not allowed to answer. And normally we get a much better reception by doing that. Um, and, at the end of the day, the way that I see it is, if someone can't, or doesn't want to, or cancels on us, like, that's fine. They've got their own life. To your point, they're super busy. A lot of the interviews that we conduct are normally after guys end or are done with their practice, and it's actually really good timing for us, because so I get off of work at around 3 my time. which is around the time that in Central European time zone, they get out of practice. And so it's like, cool. I drive home and fire up my laptop. And then by that point, they've showered and gotten home. And then we're able to just hop on. We hop on for like an hour. And then, yeah, they're normally, and, done by like 12:30, 1 a.m. their time, but they're like, I stay up that late anyways. And so that's how we've been able to get most of our interviews in, is by doing that, with the exception of the Bravos owner. We actually did that during our work day, which was really funny. Me and Danny both, working for the same company. We're like, oh shit. Are we allowed to be doing this? Let's close the door. Let's not tell the boss. But no, yeah, we normally do most of them really late at night their time. That's how we do it.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that brings me to another question. But before that, I also have another comment on what you said. That's actually one strategy that I use before starting my podcast, because like when we go live, that might be really nervous on some people, right? As like I try to build trust before I go live with the episode, but I always disclose this sentence: hey man, like before we go on streaming, if you ever feel like not talking about this or this specific topic, please let me know, and
Yeah.
I will never mention those to you, because like I really care about your comfort and your use of expressions and what you can talk about, because at the end of the day, that's their business, man. That's their business.
Yeah.
That's their job. And like they need to be accountable to the organizations that they're working for, and ELF is actually a business. So I'm coming to my next question, which just popped up to my mind. Do you actually write to players on Instagram DMs, or are you more formal in any
Yeah.
other sense?
So normally we do it that way. If we talk to somebody within the organization, like the Bravos owner, it's because we emailed the team. But for most of our player interviews, yeah, it normally is we reach out to them via DMs. We do have some other contacts as well that help us move things along, because again, I get it. They're super busy. The time zone thing really screws up communication, because it's not like, hey, a good example is Jordan Bois. We had a really hard time getting him scheduled, because he's going through rehab and stuff to fix what was going on with his injury, so he can be ready for playoffs and all of that stuff. And when he's online, I'm asleep or I'm at work. And then whenever I'm online, he's asleep or he's at work. And so it's a lot different whenever it's like, you're online and you see a message pop up, you go respond to it, versus you wake up, you might check Instagram. You're not going to immediately respond to everybody that sends you stuff. And so luckily in like that case, we had a contact over at the Vienna Vikings, Kiki Klepsch, who's their like communications director. And we were like, hey, we've been going back and forth with Jordan Bois, but we're struggling to like finally get this interview in place. And so then she was able to be like, kind of push him gently and be like, hey, go on the podcast. But yeah, a lot of like the American guys that we've had on the podcast, it's all been through Instagram DMs. And then, yeah, any organizational people that we have, it's because we reached out to the teams formally. So I think that there is kind of a balance in how to handle it. I think the way that we have it now is a pretty good setup, because I would feel, we've reached out to coaches and stuff, and I don't know if it's a generational gap as far as age or what, but coaches do not respond to DMs whatsoever, but the players do. And so, yeah, if we ever want to talk to owners, coaches, management, people within the organization, it's always best to send that formal email for sure. Yeah. And normally, because those topics are more related to the operations of the team too, instead of like personal journey, it's also probably better to get that cleared through the team as well. Like obviously Jaime has the ability to, because he's the owner of the team, he knows what he can and can't say. But if we were to be talking to, an assistant coach about something, like I'm sure that there's some stuff that he can and can't say that he may not know ahead of time. So I'm sure that in those instances, the organization probably has to sit down and be like, hey, by the way, don't touch on these topics. So
yeah, definitely. There are many differences between players and coaches, and yeah, like I actually found out that I tend to talk more, and like those topics tend to be more exciting when I speak with players, because like oftentimes I ask them about their journeys, or what was your most unforgettable games, or
Mhm.
what was your leap that you had to go through, like maybe you were successful up to this level, but there you got slapped by the higher levels of football. Then how did you overcome that challenge, like those kind of questions. And actually, like, I never told you about this, but when I started my podcast, like, I thought about how would I differ myself, because
Right.
there are many podcasts out there, especially in the US right now. There are like thousands and thousands of podcasts talking about
Everybody
football.
has one.
And
Yeah.
I thought about the long run, like, about the long run, why would people listen to my podcast? That's a very, very fundamental question. So the way I shaped my podcast, and like the way I strategized, was that I actually want that the people listening to my podcast will learn at least one or two new things that they would never that they didn't know before that. Like, it's that might be, how can I be a better player? How can I be a better coach? How can I take care of my body? How can I take care of my nutrition? Or like more on a mental level. Like, for example, I did some episodes with the national team, like ELF players in Turkey. Like, I specifically asked them, like, how do you what was the biggest challenge that you encounter, and how did you go over that? Like, how did you
Mhm.
try to tackle that? So I try to strategize my podcast about like some sort of educative content. So, like,
Right.
do you have this sort of strategy, or are you just going for fun, especially at this point of time?
We definitely started off with fun. Again, to your point, yeah, everybody's got a podcast, and we're no different. We're a bunch of dudes who just wanted to talk into a microphone. So yeah, definitely started off as fun. I think now that we have entered the ELF sphere, we're starting to understand that we need to have a strategy, because there is a lot of opportunity for us to grow, in this area, this particular niche. And with the upcoming NFL season, yeah, we're still going to cover it just like we did last year, and we're going to continue to do that. We probably won't see a ton of growth from it, just because, to your point exactly, everybody's got an NFL podcast, especially here in the US. But what we do plan to continue doing is figuring out what is our strategy going to look like for the ELF season next year, because this is where we've seen the biggest chunk of our growth, is since we've been covering the ELF. And so, obviously, once the championship game is over and the off season hits, we're not really going to be doing anything, especially those first couple of months after, because nothing really happens. We'll as news comes out, we'll mention it here and there as need be, but really focusing on, what does it look like for the 2025 season? How are we really going to capitalize on it? And part of what we've done is we've recognized that not everybody listens to podcasts, especially outside of the United States. And to your point, it is growing in Europe and even where you're at in Turkey and such. But it's not to the same level where it is here in the States, where it's like everybody listens to podcasts here. Like, anyone that's around my age, I feel like, has a podcast that they love, they listen to every day. We don't listen to the radio on our way to work anymore. We listen to podcasts. And but with, again, going back to that, with the demographic being different and not everybody listening to it in Europe, we started venturing into actually writing for a blog too. And so we started off, we did a little Wix site just to put some content out, and then we were approached by some folks over at American Football International, which is a really fantastic website. If you've ever heard of them, they do a lot of stuff over the ELF, the GFL. I think they also do stuff for the Turkish League. They're great content provider, and so they asked if we wanted to start submitting what we were going to publish on our Wix site, which nobody was really going to, onto AFI instead. And so we were like, heck yeah, a lot more reach that way. And so, yeah, we've been writing for them as well. And I think that that'll be a big part of our strategy moving forward, is how do we take these interviews that we're doing and these episodes that we're creating, and how do we take the most important chunks and condense it down in a 5-minute read for people who, yeah, I don't have time to listen to an hour and 15-minute podcast, but I do have time to take 10 minutes out of my day to read an article about my favorite team. And so I think that that's going to be a big part of our strategy for 2025 is the written content that's associated with it.
Yeah, I see. Definitely. I again saying this maybe the 100th time, but yeah, I saw that you're going on a very good path right now, because of the business opportunities and what you just mentioned, like podcasts, everyday business for the fellow Americans, right? Like there are thousands of podcasts, so when you have that thought and apply it to any other thing, especially about the American football, because like what we call here in Europe, I would call it American football. That's not
Yeah.
football first; that's American football, right?
Yeah.
So what I experienced with the imports, we call the American players or like any other nationality, we call them imports. So let's put it that way. So you have a lot of podcasts, you have a lot of NFL academies or like football academy, like for specific positions. Like the market is big in the US. Like you have if I play DB, like DB is my position. If
Okay.
I if I
Word.
was if I was in the US, probably there will be like in my state there will be some DB clinic that I would go to if I wanna improve my game, or like especially for a quarterback there are 1,000 different resources to develop your game, or like there are thousands of YouTube channels like how to train if you're a wide receiver, like those things of like resources about the American football in the US is easy to reach. But what I experienced with the imports coming over here is that, like, an import is a very spectacular phenomena. A guy is coming all the way, taking like 14, 15 hours flight to come to my country to play what he does best. And still
Yeah.
saying, my friend, like for most of them, their job is to play football. But right now, let's say, like almost all, like 90% of the homegrown players in Europe or in Turkey or, generally, in Europe, they have let's say real jobs with which they earn money.
Right.
So
Yeah.
football is still a very developing concept in Europe. So let's put it that way. Like we are very, very, very eager to learn about how those athletes eat, how those athletes train, how those athletes take care of their mental state for the game, like for the big games that they're gonna play. Because we have a lot of things to learn from them. So if you ever talk with an import player, like they're actually quite surprised, like how many times they got approached, how many times they've been asked, like, "Hey, man, like." Very, very like for you Americans, it's very, very simple questions like, "Hey man, how do I put my step right here on the field? If I want to go to that direction." Or very simple questions like, "When the ball is thrown, do I look from here or do I look from there?" Like those very, very simplistic questions. But the reason why we ask them those type of questions is because we don't know, because the industry is not expanded as big as it is in the US. So like taking the discussion from here, like I actually want to ask you that like when the off season comes in the ELF, or like let's not only talk about the ELF, but about your podcast and what you want to do with it. Like where where do you want to go with the podcast, and let's say in the next year, where are we gonna see Jordan?
Well, so I actually, you gave me some really good perspective just then, because I didn't even think about what you were talking about as far as, yeah, just the amount of resources that we have here for, yeah, running routes, proper throwing mechanics, nutrition, all of that stuff. And I didn't even think about, how invaluable that might be to our European listenership as far as, having the players talk about it. So actually, I won't steal your idea. I will give you credit for it, but I like that, and I might have to add that in once the off season hits, because like I know. Granted, this is one of the Euro guys, but like Jordan Bois is regimen to keep his body straight is insane. Because we were talking about it when we weren't recording, just where he was talking about just like what he does and stuff. And I didn't even think to bring that in. So no, that's a good point. I like that. As far as once the off season hits, like what we plan to do moving forward to really separate ourselves, though, is we're experimenting with something this on our upcoming episode that we might use that format moving forward to make our NFL stuff a little bit more spicy. I can't say what it is because we want to keep it a surprise, but definitely changing the format where it's not just a bunch of guys sitting down and talking. Because if you want to hear a bunch of guys sitting down and talking about the NFL, then I mean, the Kelsey brothers have a great podcast. You can get a podcast with pretty much any local journalist for any team. I've got like 6 different Cowboys podcasts that I listen to. So what we're about to do is definitely going to shake it up. Hopefully something that's a little bit more entertaining, something that almost feels more like a show than it does a discussion, more of a production instead of a conversation, to really grab people's attention and bring them in. So I guess shameless plug here, but yeah, definitely for your listeners, definitely check out our episode this upcoming Thursday, because we got something really fun going on. We're bringing in some of the biggest journalists within the ELF. We've got Matt Bresington, who says he's going to be there. Alex Malchow is going to be there. Jamal Clay is going to be there. So we got something cooking on the horizon that I think we're going to take that same format and apply it to our NFL stuff as well, and maybe bring in some fan bases like we were doing in the off season, but switch up the format.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. I don't know what I'm gonna see, but I will be definitely checking your episode on Thursday. So I'm very excited about that. Um, yeah, when you like those like last 3 names, I really don't know about them. So probably it's a shame on me because you know better than me right now, which leads you to a better business opportunity that I wouldn't foresee, right? So that's actually my point. Like that's what I've been talking about like for the last 15-20 minutes. So like in the ELF right now, or not get limited to the ELF, but in Europe right now, like the business opportunity is coming in pretty quick. So when you think about the ELF, it started in if I'm not mistaken, the first season was 2021, then
Yep.
2022, 3, 4. This is the fourth season right now. And when you think about the exponential growth it has, it has been like a big exponential growth. So right now, my man, you have very easy access to big people within the league because for example, if you decide to reach ELF commissioner in any sort of way, probably you will. Like at least like even if he wouldn't reply to you maybe, but he will of course like see your message. That's a thing. Like that's a blessing that you have right now. But if you try to reach like an NFL commissioner, probably you wouldn't be able to. You know what I'm saying. So yeah, I'm very excited about what is ahead of you, and yeah, I will be keep myself updated with your podcast. But
Well, and so real quick, not to cut you off, but you made a really good point just then as to why this has been such an exciting project, and why I encourage you and others to jump into covering the ELF now is because, like, I know I keep bringing up this example, but we got to talk to the owner of the Madrid Bravos. If I were to email Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys right now, he would never see my email. His secretary would probably never see my email. Like, that's how high up it is in the NFL. Versus whenever we found out we were going to get to talk to the owner, we were like, wait, you said the owner? And they were like, yeah, the owner of the club. And we're like, not his assistant, not a secretary, the owner. Oh, okay, cool. No pressure. But yeah, that is so. I definitely encourage anyone who's thinking about covering the ELF, do it now. Now is the time, while it's growing, while people are still willing to talk to random journalists and things like that. Now is the time.
Yeah, I really believe so. That's the message. You actually summarized it for me. But I also want to mention like couple challenges that might be on your way because
Mhm.
ELF is not the only league in Europe. So if
Right.
you like, I watched a couple of videos like back in the days, like you know how NFL was formed back in the days. Like it was not the NFL in the beginning. There were like one or two other leagues, but they were
Mhm.
unsuccessful. So NFL was the succeeding league over them all, and you know like it's been like that for like 70, 80 years or something. So right
Yeah.
now, ELF is not the only league in Europe. So like we have many different countries, and like most of them, yeah, like they also have pretty good football level. Many of the people would think that ELF has a very similar level of football in comparison to the GFL.
Mhm.
Because right now what I see in the ELF is that the talent gap, or let's put it away. So for example, in the US you have a draft system, right? So it
Mhm.
actually gives almost equal opportunities to every team which want to build their team in the new season, you know? But we don't
Right.
have like ELF doesn't have a draft system. So let's put an example, let's give a shout out to Ryan Fire, let's say. So what
Yeah.
I heard externally that might be just it's pretty much true. I know about it. So money works, right? So they have
Right.
better chances, better opportunities. Whereas, like, I don't want to give any bad reputation to any of the teams, but it is very difficult, for let's say Istanbul Rams. They withdrew from the league because of the economical reasons. Like money
Mhm.
works in that sense because they can afford better imports, better facilities, better coaches and structure and so on. So let's turn back to my initial point. So there are many other different leagues which I believe has a very good level of football. Let's say I follow closely the Italian league and I follow a German league. I follow the Swedish league and the Finnish league, like the league from
Mhm.
Finland. So we have European tournament, which happens in every 2 years, I believe. So like Austria has a great league, and also they have like two teams in the EFL right now. So if I'm
Mhm.
not mistaken, ELF is on a very fundamental level. ELF is commercializing the European football right now, and
Mhm.
it's only the beginning right now. It's the fourth season being played right now, right? So just to add one or two business ideas, like for your podcast, like ELF is definitely, I believe, it's gonna be the the leading force in Europe, but there are also
Mhm.
other leagues happening at the same time, which almost has the similar talent level. Like I really appreciate the Italian players and the like Finnish players, though
Mhm.
like the most successful of them are trying to go to ELF. I think that's a success for the ELF commissioner, I believe. So they're winning their competition over the other leagues. But yeah, just curious. Have you encountered any other players, or did them ever spike your interest? Like because they're really good players in any other league.
Yeah, so actually, we had a really good conversation with Jordan Bois about this. In that, to your point, yes, there is fantastic talent just all across Europe that, if they could ever figure out a way to truly make it one league, just like the NFL is one league, I think that you would see so much more growth because the talent disparity wouldn't be as big. You wouldn't have issues of like my Barcelona Dragons getting whooped every week because they're just not good and they're just that bad. Versus, you start to like I know that there are some Spanish players who make more money for their Spanish league team than they would playing for Barcelona. Another example that I think of is like I know that Paris pays their players pretty well. They haven't told me what number, but I've been told that Paris pays their players incredibly well. So that incentivizes the talent to want to be in Paris and go play for the Musketeers. Um, and so I don't know how you fix that problem if you're the ELF, but there are so many good like Italian players to your point who aren't going to go play for the Milano Seamen because they're going to go make more money playing for like the Venetian team or I don't remember which what the mascot is for the Roman team, but the team out in Rome, like they're going to make more money that way. And at the end of the day, this it is a business. This is people who are trying to, yes, they have full-time jobs, most of them, but I'm going to go where the money's at. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of where the problem lies, is how do you get all of these entities to come together and make one cohesive league? So then that way the top tier talent truly is all the top tier talent. Because, I think that a team like the Milano Seamen could be, competing with the Stuttgart Surge and Rhine Fires of the world if they had all of their best Italian players. And so, yeah, that's well above my pay grade. But I mean, if the ELF ever wanted to bring me on as a consultant, I'm sure I could probably help them figure it out. But yeah, I think that's where they're at now. And it's, that's just part of the growing pains of this league, is trying to figure out how to get it to that point. And something that we've toyed around with on our podcast is this idea of, similar to, I'm going to have to call it soccer just because we've been calling American football so much on this in this discussion. I recognize that y'all call it football though, but in soccer, you relegate teams that aren't doing well. If you have a team like Barcelona who isn't even competitive, every time they step out onto the field, they don't score a single point, and they're letting the other team drop 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 points at a time. They just don't need to be a part of that league. And so then they go down a tier. And so I think in a perfect world for the ELF and just for football in Europe / also Turkey as a whole, is how do we get it to a point where, yeah, you've got like 3 different tiers of talent, and up at the very, very top, yeah, maybe that's the ELF, or if they want to change the name to something else, but you've got that top tier. That's where all the best teams play. I believe that in soccer they call that the Champions League, right? Am I not mistaken with that?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, so you have that, and then tier 2, tier 3, as teams start to become uncompetitive, they start to have front office issues, general managers start to screw up, can't retain their talent, and they become uncompetitive. Then you knock them down to the other tiers, and so then that way you're constantly having the best product out on the field at all times for that top level.
Yeah, that might be a good solution. Like, that's a solution that we see pretty much anywhere in the world, but it also requires um, like gradual development. And what I'm saying is
Right.
that we are only experiencing the 4th year of the ELF. So I believe the solutions are there to be found. That's my mindset.
Mhm.
But yeah, like, turning back to some of the like magazine of the ELF, like those topics, I heard there's a big discussion going on. Like, some players opting out to choose, let's say, German football league because they might had a better offer in comparison to the ELF. So that actually incentivized them to go play for the German football league. I heard, like, if I'm not mistaken, I heard about it might be false. It's just a rumor. I heard also, just you said, like, Paris Musketeers are very well paid. Like, I heard Potsdam Royals are paying good money. And I
Mhm.
remember, like, even before the ELF, I know about that from Xavier, like, because before he played for the Vienna Vikings, he was playing for New York Lions. And first time I saw in his stories that, like, the team has a car, and that was like, the team has a car, the team has a general manager, and their opportunities and their, like, resources are, like, it seemed rich. it was
Yeah.
it was a good life from an external eye. So the competition is still there between ELF and the GFL or any of the teams. So it actually affects the teams, like ELF teams, on a negative sense, let's say. Actually, one of my biggest surprises was that, because I'm a very close follower of the European Championship, which happens every other year. So
Mhm.
in 2022, Italy actually won the cup. So Italy became the best European country on a national team level, And probably you know about that. Luke Zahradka is the quarterback for the team Italy.
Mhm.
So the year after, in 2023, they established the club Milano Seamen, which was already there in the Italian Football League, but it entered the ELF. So I was having my hopes quite high, because I'm a like I really like Italian Football League. but it was an upset alert. It was a big upset for me because Seaman didn't perform as well as the other teams. So there is like still going on like big discussions and the fundamental problems about the development of the teams. But what I'm saying is that ELF doesn't necessarily reflect the true level of the talent there, because when money is involved, which creates a business, let's say, there comes a different dynamics about competition. So when the national teams compete, let's say, I think the best example, like that disproves my argument here, last year, 2023, yeah, I was mistaken. The European Cup that Italy won was in 2021. Sweden got the second place, and there in the second tournament that I followed, it was 2023, and then Austria won the cup, which has a pretty good level of football right now. And then the second
Yeah, I do.
place was the second place, who lost the European final, was Finland. And it's still shame that, in my opinion, Finland doesn't have a team in the ELF. So
Mhm.
just talking pretty much, rambling on here, just to give you a better understanding of the European football. But what I argue here is that I think ELF will be a different place in 10 years. So
Yeah,
you can
I'm right there with you.
yeah.
Also, there are rumors that it won't be specifically just Finland. I believe that, but there are rumors that there will be a Nordic team essentially in the
Yeah,
ELF.
yeah,
Which, man, if they combine all three Nordic countries together, that team might be unstoppable, man. They got some huge dudes over there, dude.
yeah,
They're massive. Um, but
yeah,
no, yeah, I'm with you. I think that, yeah, give it 10, 15 years. They're in the growing pains process. They're having to figure things out. I think something else that might help them is they need to lean into the storylines more. Something that I've noticed, they have excellent communications as far as the quality of like their videos and their announcements and everything else, but they're still missing that why do I care piece that, a lot of other leagues have. And something, I again going back to soccer, or what y'all call football, is, whenever you have Wales playing, I don't know what the London team is, but whenever they're facing off against each other, those fans hate each other. And it is such a rivalry, and people are getting in each other's faces. And obviously, you don't want violence in the game, but that's what makes the sport so awesome. Is people love to trash talk, people love to cheer for their team, and it's gonna ruin my day if my team loses to this team, kind of thing. And you got to feed into that a little bit more. And I think that that's something that the ELF is currently missing. And same thing amongst their players too. Like I know that there's like rivalry week that they do in the ELF, but I don't feel the rivalry. I don't feel like these teams actually hate each other. One of the things that I really appreciated about Zach Edwards' interview was I always try to give the players a question, give them the opportunity to talk a little shit if they want to. And he's the only one who took the opportunity to be like, hey, look, if they if we're playing them, then we're gonna win, kind of thing. And actually, I take that back. Jordan Bois also likes to talk crap. And I appreciated that. And but you need a little bit more of that competitive nature in order for this league to survive, because a lot of what I see, and there's nothing wrong with it. Truly, it's probably better for the game that if they take it so purely of, hey man, we're out here, we're competitive, but you won today, let's shake hands. Like I get that that's what the true nature of football should be, but if we're talking about growing the fan base and growing your audiences and trying to get more Americans to watch these games and trying to get even more people in Europe who maybe don't really understand anything about American football to enjoy it, is you got to make the stakes higher. You got to figure out a way to, get some chippiness out on the field. I don't see players getting in other players' faces. I'm That's what I love about like the NFL, or even like, man, there's so much trash talking in college football when you have the rivals, like the SEC games when Bama and Auburn are playing against each other, or like Georgia and Clemson, like they hate each other. And so I'm like, how do you get to that point? Because you see it in other European sports where I'm a big basketball guy, and I always watch all the FIBA stuff and EuroLeague and everything else. And when I see Luka Doncic playing up against Rudy Gobert, I know for a fact Luka Doncic hates Rudy Gobert. And it makes the storyline more fun. It makes the game more fun because guys are yelling at each other. It's the competitive nature. So they've got to figure out a way to lean more into that to tell that story.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. That also, yeah, that again brings back to my main argument that there are many things to be developed right here in this league,
Right.
and I believe we're getting there, we're coming there, and I'm very happy that both you and I'm not directly involved, but your episodes and your podcasts are coming right through it, and I believe you
Mhm.
will have like pretty successful future if you keep going like this. Jordan, my friend, we're almost coming to the 1 hour mark. It's very good conversations going on, but at
Yeah.
this, like, at one point, like, yeah, I might keep talking for like 2 or 3 hours more. But yeah, at one point, we need to wrap this up. But
Okay.
before we come to the close of this episode, like, we talk about quite a lot of things, like your episodes, like how do you strategize your podcast, the future of the ELF, and what are the current challenges, like some comparison between ELF and the other leagues, and the challenges of doing this business from US, big geographical gap, time zone gap whatsoever. But like, is there anything you specifically want to talk about or mention more, but you couldn't find a chance to just ramble on? Is there anything?
No, I think that we covered pretty much everything. Yeah, you know, again, have just been so encouraged from, this is our first year covering the ELF, and they have accepted us with open arms, and we're slowly becoming everybody's favorite Americans, and it's a good time. And so I would say that anybody who enjoys the ELF, or, if you're a GFL person, or you're into the Italian league, whatever it is, start covering it, and covering it now, because I'm with you. I think in 10 to 15 years, we're going to look at the ELF and it's going to be what, FIBA or EuroLeague basketball is, and where it's like, it's not quite the NBA, but man, it is some damn good hoops, and people from all over the world watch it. And so I think that the ELF they're working towards that right now, of being able to get to that point. And so while they're still at a developmental phase, and people are still willing to take random podcast interviews from random guys across the pond, I would say now is the time, because it would suck for anybody who has these aspirations of covering the ELF, the GFL, any of these other leagues, and you wait that 10 years, and then all of a sudden, well, we've got 15 podcasts that cover the ELF. We've got 10 podcasts that cover the GFL and their development into the ELF. And then all of a sudden, whenever you start reaching out to people, they might start leaving you on red. They may not, answer your calls, your emails, things like that, because they've got their people that they feel okay with talking to. And so I would say jump in now. Don't wait, jump in now.
Yeah, that's a very good message, and I got pretty much inspired by that. And I'm 100% sure I will start shooting more messages to European players, because barrier of entry is pretty low nowadays. And I really appreciate what you're doing with your podcast. And please keep bringing in more stories about the ELF players. And like, I believe both you and more likely you, is on a better path. And I really like. I'm keen to see like your podcast getting developing your business in the ELF, and as the ELF grows itself, I think we'll be on a good path. And my friend Jordan, like that was very nice speaking to you. I took some notes.
Likewise.
I will be watching your episode on Thursday. And please, like all the viewers up till this point, I really appreciate if you listen to us talking up to this
Yes.
point. Please don't forget to go to. I will definitely edit like somewhere here. Like somewhere here. Fourth Down Fiasco is the podcast that we've been talking about. Is Jordan's podcast. Please, a big shout out. Fourth Down Fiasco. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify, any other platform.
Apple Podcasts as well. So if you're an Apple
Sure.
listener.
Yes, sir. YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcast. You can check it out. The last episode was with Riley Hennessy, if I'm not mistaken, and the
On
every
YouTube, yeah.
episode. Yes, and the episodes are coming through every Thursday. Let's
Yep.
put it in as a fact. So, my friend Jordan, it was very nice talking to you again. Um, Till next time, let's say. Hope to see you in Europe, my friend. Like, yeah,
Listen, brother, I'm trying to visit Istanbul. So, it looks beautiful out there. I've always been interested in it. I think that, Turkey, really just that area just has some of the best food in the world, man. So
yeah,
I'm trying to go see it, man. Trying
yeah.
to go see it.
I'll make sure I'll give you a good tour if you ever come around here. And I hope to see you in Europe, my friend. And
Mhm.
thank you so much for this episode. We'll keep in touch probably. And yeah, let's close with the sentence. Let's note this down, this date and this episode, what we talked about for the last hour. And I believe like a year from now on, we will remember this moment and we will be quite surprised. Okay.
Love it.
Thank you so much, all the listeners. If you listen to my podcast up till here, please like and subscribe so that I can keep producing this sort of beautiful content. Until next time, I was with Jordan Pryor, host of the Fourth Down Fiasco. Please check this podcast out and peace out. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.